So thank you, Anna. Welcome, everyone. We are very happy to welcome you at this second webinar that is organized by Agroecology-TRANSECT Horizon Europe program. TRANSECT means transdisciplinary approaches for systemic economic, ecological, and climate change transition. We started in September 2022 for 4 years, which means that we are at month 18, and our global ambition is written on this first slide, laying the groundwork for agroecology as the future of farming in Europe by learning, engaging, and inspiring action. So just as an introduction, I will just give you just very briefly some more information on our project. Our objective, our aim is to contribute to unfolding the full potential of agroecology for European agriculture, and we really focus on 3 dimensions. We want to quantify the potential of agroecology for climate change adaptation and mitigation, for biodiversity conservation in farm ecosystem, and for farm socioeconomic resilience. And to do this, we very central in our project is the contribution of 11 innovation hubs that have been engaged in agroecological transformation for more than 4 years. They are all represented by these yellow drops on the map. And today you will hear more from our Bulgarian innovation hub that is focusing on high nature value livestock farming system. But you don't see on what the others are working, but I can guarantee that they are working on all type of agricultural system across Europe. Our aim is really to generate actionable knowledge, and also to do this, so we have 19 partners, including, of course, academics, but also NGOs, private consultants from 12 countries. And for the scientists, we are half from the biological science, agronomy, animal science, ecology, half from economics, political, and sustainability science. We are, of course, dealing with transition. I'm sure that many of you are aware of this framework. That is one of our reference framework. In blue, you've got the dominant socio-technical regime, and in pink, you've got the niche innovations. And you know that public opinion and awareness, global change, political agenda put pressure on the different regime, and doing this they offer opportunities for niche innovations to anchor in the dominant regime. And what we do in the project, we try to analyze how to create supporting conditions locally to this niche innovation to anchor in the dominant regime. And the very last idea, the very last 2 ideas that we aim to unlock agroecology potential through scaling out and scaling up. Of course, we will not only focus on the work conducted in these 11 innovation hubs across Europe. At territory level, we aim to analyze where do biophysical and socioeconomic conditions are more or less conducive for agroecological production system. And doing this, we aim to identify options for scaling out success across Europe. And one of our first action was to identify 89 agroecological initiatives that were surveyed across 23 European countries. The first 40 are represented on the map. Really, the idea is just to show you that we will not only focus only on the work conducted in these 11 innovation hubs. And my final words is that we are also thinking on the scaling up. So that's why we are also interested in European policies. And at the European Union level, our aim is to analyze how do policy instruments facilitate or limit the expansion of agroecology. This work has started by analyzing existing databases, but of course, as stakeholders in our innovation hubs and in other initiatives are considered as central to the process, we see them as innovators and test samples. And with them, we think on the need to engage with policymakers on agroecology and to better understand the policy cycle at the different levels of government in Europe. And this is what will structure this webinar today. We will go from municipal level in Leipzig to the European Union level. So thanks a lot. And I leave the floor to Stephen.
All right, thank you, Bertrand. So my name is Stephen Lighthizer. I'm going to be co-moderating the webinar today with my colleague, Walter Rossing. We are both based at the Farming Systems Ecology group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And we work as a part of Work Package 3, where our work centers around actor-oriented research in the project. So our main focus there is to bring together scientific and experiential knowledge. And we want to promote learning and also encourage, as Bertrand mentioned, the co-production of actionable knowledge. So that's knowledge that is both relevant and useful to practitioners produced together with scientists. And one thing we've observed already in year one is that actionable knowledge is not always about creating new knowledge per se, but sometimes it's rather about making existing knowledge out there actionable. And what I mean by that is unlocking and empowering the knowledge that people have to put it to use. So what we see is there's more and more knowledge about how agroecology can help us to transform food systems and agricultural systems towards sustainability and resilience. And the benefits of agroecology are increasingly clear to both scientists and practitioners. But what remains less clear is how this knowledge can be used to transform food systems more broadly. And of course, a big part of that is how can policy frameworks become more supportive of agroecology and enabling farmers to transition. And many are still struggling with this question of how can support for agroecology be scaled up and how can that knowledge be institutionalized into more support. So today, we're going to hear from 3 speakers who have direct experience working at this interface of knowledge, practice, and policy about their different efforts to scale up agroecology. And the aim, again, is to better understand the policy cycle at these different levels and when and how scientists and practitioners can effectively intervene and interact with policymakers to support agroecological scaling up. We're going to begin with 3 different presentations, like I mentioned, from our speakers. There'll be a little bit of time after each presentation for a few brief clarifying questions. Those are clarifying questions, but if you have longer topics for discussion, we'd ask you to save those until the end, where we'll have a longer and more open dialogue. And I'm not sure if our first speaker, Susana, was here yet. Is that?
Yeah, she was a genius and managed the whole thing. So Susana's with us now. We can welcome her.
Okay, great. All right, so then I'll welcome Susana Gaona-Saez to the floor. She is a research program officer at the European Commission, working in the field of agriculture, forestry, and rural development, research and innovation. And among other things, she has contributed to development and implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy, and including the European Innovation Partnership for Agricultural Productivity and Sustainability. So welcome, Susana. Yeah, we're curious to hear about your insights on the European policy process.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me also?
Perfect.
I guess so. Okay, thank you. And apologies for the delay. I had some technical trouble, but we could manage quickly with your help. So thanks a lot for that. And my apologies again. So, well, thanks first of all for the invitation to Bertrand, to everybody in the team of Agroecology-TRANSECT. It's really an interesting debate, and it's actually one of the questions and one of the I wouldn't say challenges, yeah, but somehow that we have in terms of making sure that research results are useful for policy, which is at all levels, not only European level, but also at national, regional, etc. In particular, when it comes to agroecology, I would say. So, well, as I have already been introduced, so I'm research program officer in DG Agriculture and Rural Development of the European Commission. So I work in the unit for research and innovation, and I am responsible in particular for the files on agroecology, organic farming, and agroforestry as well. So in that role, I am, among others, the policy officer of Agroecology-TRANSECT, and this is how the invitation came about. So in terms of what I have already been introduced, my experience is mostly on the side of the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe programs. Of course, it has a lot of links and a lot of relation with the CAP and the EIP AGRI, of course, because actually we work very much in coordination, and there is an absolute need for really making stronger links between these two tools, which are key. But just to clarify that I'm not working so much on the CAP part of things, but really on the research, but of course with strong links with the CAP, as you can imagine. Well, a little disclaimer at the beginning, just to mention that what I'm going to share with you, where the tips or the recommendations that I may share with you are just my personal experience, my personal opinion. Don't take it as an official position from the European Commission. So just to clarify, just in case. So I mean, what I wanted to tell you, because well, I received a few questions from you. Thank you for that. In relation to what you would expect to hear from my side. Well, first of all, I think in terms of agroecology and in terms of the policy processes and how to influence the policy processes when it comes to agroecology, I think we are with a particularly challenging field because of the whole concept itself is so broad and so entailing so many dimensions that one could not identify just a single European policy in this case that affects, you know, the agroecology transition in Europe. Of course, we have the common agricultural policy as a key policy there that cannot be ignored. But I would say that we really need to keep a very broad overview in terms of the EU policy landscape, because there are so many other aspects, like, for instance, policies related to the use of pesticides, fertilizers, consumers, food safety. I mean, you name it. It's really, really wide. But of course, the common agricultural policy is central because it has a lot of implications. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. Then, of course, when you zoom in a little bit more in the CAP, as you know, since the beginning of the new CAP that we are implementing now, we have a new delivery model by which, let's say, the decisions and the design of the tool is really left to the selection or the desires, the wishes of the member states to really adapt to the national needs and the regional needs, of course, in this case as well. And from my perspective, I think this is a good thing for agroecology, because this is actually what is needed. More focus on the context specificity, on the context, the challenges in the specific context, and the new delivery model, in my opinion, will be something that can facilitate the transmission of research results into the national policies and to help policymakers at the national level to design the right measures for the challenges that the farmers in their specific territories are facing coming out of research. So that's, I think, a good thing. But something to consider in this regard is that when it comes to sharing the research results with policymakers and engaging in dialogue with policymakers, the EU level is, of course, very important, but more increasingly is also the national level. So I would not forget this dimension when it comes to having dialogue between science and policy in relation to the outcomes of research on agroecology. Then I think, I mean, in terms of stages and which moments of the process we could have as good moments for inputs from society, including science, in the policy process. Well, I think most of you may know that every time that the Commission proposes a new regulation, stakeholders are systematically consulted, and these are inputs that are really considered for the preparation of regulations, of communications. So this is not the case right now for instance, in the case of the Common Agricultural Policy, because there is no moment yet to really prepare a new CAP, etc. But when time comes, this will be done, of course. So consultations to stakeholders are done on a regular basis. I would say not only for the preparation of regulations or communications, but there are plenty of bodies, plenty of expert groups for specific subjects with members from different constituencies, organizations, member states to address specific subjects. For instance, there are the civil dialogue groups also organized concretely by DG Agriculture on several aspects. There is one specifically on organics, for instance. There are several others on arable crops, on the implementation of the CAP. And these are also good moments to eventually share research results with certain actors, the Commission, but also with stakeholders in this particular case, which is, I think, interesting for research projects also to keep into consideration. Then when it comes to, since I'm speaking also from the research and innovation part of things, as I said at the beginning, I'm not directly involved in the preparation or the implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy, but more on the Horizon Europe part. Of course, we very much need also to be informed regularly about the results of the research that we are funding, of course, not only because of the fact that we are funding and we need to have results, but because we need this information also when we are planning for future research. And this is actually something that is happening at the moment. And in this regard, in terms of opportunities for providing feedback, there is an opportunity that may be coming quite soon. I think it's around April, where there will be an open possibility for stakeholders to provide feedback on the let's say the orientations that we in the Commission are having vis-a-vis the preparation of the next work program of Horizon Europe, which is going to be only for 1 year, 2025. So there will be an opportunity for stakeholders at large to provide feedback there. Basically, it means to provide feedback on what can be the priorities to focus on for the last part of Horizon Europe, particularly for the 2025 work program. So this is a very concrete occasion that they will be available. Then a little bit more going in depth into these subjects in terms of the information that is needed for policy development. I mean, I think it really depends. Of course, in the case of agroecology, I think it's, despite the fact that it is an area where, of course, there is evidence on the benefits and there are already a lot of results out there from projects. Nevertheless, there is still, I think, lack of some evidence, more evidence, specifically in context specificity. Again, is such wide. I mean, in the case of Europe, we have such a wide range and variety of pedoclimatic conditions. I don't think we are still there in terms of understanding well how, let's say, agroecology works in every specific region, every specific condition. Much more needs to be done there. So I would say that in the case of agroecology, more evidence is needed. And in particular, on the socioeconomic aspects, in particular also not to convince only policymakers, but to convince farmers. I think it's important to not to lose sight of this in terms of selling or really promoting the benefits of agroecology. These are things that are very much needed, and the actors need to be considered on an equal footing, I think, policymakers, but as I say, also end users and other actors of the value chain. Then, of course, in terms of evidence, there will be a full set of things that we would need. I mean, in terms of tools, methodologies that perhaps may allow understanding from policymakers better the linkages between different measures or practices. So putting one in the foot of a policymaker, really, in order to promote a measure, you need to understand whether what you're going to put in a regulation or what you're going to promote as a measure has actually an impact. And not only for a single measure, because again, in the case of agroecology, we are talking about a holistic approach. So it's a set of practices. And there again, I believe that evidence on the effect of that combination of practices is still quite very much missing. So again, this would be also a role for research to tackle, need to tackle on this side. What to say more about the maximizing the impact on policies of scientific outputs? This is really something that I think should be the result of a collective efforts, both on the side of the projects, but also internally in our job. Basically, one of our main functions is really to make sure that we make the link between the projects, like for instance, Agroecology-TRANSECT, but we have many others. We have hundreds of projects being running at the time and funded by the European Union. And in this case, when the projects are running, our role in the particular unit I'm working in is really to put in touch the projects with the policymakers, let's say in this case, in the case of the Common Agricultural Policy. So really those colleagues who are working on the preparation and the implementation of the measures, just to really facilitate the dialogue and on very concrete things, really concrete outputs and concrete things that projects are finding, and on the side of the colleagues working on policy, sharing their needs and sharing their feedback in terms of the results that are being produced. So this is, for me, it's a very key aspect and a key exercise that we regularly promote. We believe it's something that is very important, and in that sense, we always call on the research projects to keep us as policy officers very much informed and aware of the policy, of the developments of your projects, the outcomes, the deliverables, any moments where there is opportunity, for instance, to participate in workshops or to share really your results with policymakers beyond the review meetings that are like more procedural moments in which there is, of course, this opportunity also to engage with the policy colleagues. But beyond that, if you have events, workshops, etc., do not hesitate to, well, in this case, let me know, because I'm the policy officer of your project, but in general, the policy officers of all the projects you may be involved in, because this is something that we should really capitalize on. It's something that we have the links internally with the colleagues, and we can help you do that. Then in terms of less the procedural aspects, but in terms of how we fund research, or what type of research we found, and what are the requirements that we include in the topics and the calls that we have in the work program, specifically in the area of agriculture, rural development, and forestry. I would say something quite specific that we have in this particular area of Horizon Europe. I'm pretty sure that you are aware, because your project is a multi-actor project, as we call it. Through the calls and through the research that we promote, we really increasingly ask the projects to be multi-actor, which means that they need to, any proposal that is going to be funded needs to show a genuine involvement of the end users at all stages, even from the preparation of the proposal. And then, of course, in the development and performing the activities of the project, it needs to be demonstrated. And why? Because we think that this is one of the best ways to ensure that research is demand driven, and that then the results of the research are going to be taken up by the end users. It's something that is being heard of many times, that sometimes the results coming out of research projects, specifically in the area of agriculture, seem to be a bit lost or not taken up by farmers. And this is one of the ways that we have for to tackle this problem. So really ensure and demand and request this from the projects, even to get the funding. It's a requirement in many occasions to ensure that there is this involvement. And this is something also that we are also promoting with the kind of a new approach in the agricultural sector research, which you may have heard of, which are the living labs, which is basically the classical, let's say, multi-actor approach, but maybe taken to a next level in terms of the types of factors that are included, in terms of the more place-based focused, in terms of the multidisciplinarity and the process itself of getting engaged in a living lab and getting the co-creation, testing, experimentation process involving all the relevant stakeholders. So these are ways also to ensure that there is more impact out of the projects that we are funding. I think I'm about to finalize. I hope I'm still in the given time that I had. In terms of
time.
Okay, thank you. No, just a last thing that I had understood that you wanted to hear, but I think I have already mentioned somehow before, in terms of types of events or formats for making the scientific research, the research outcomes known. I have already mentioned a few occasions or a few examples of types of meetings that we as policy officers can help you projects get in touch with policymakers, but there are also other occasions such as conferences, to the wider public, not specifically focused on research, but on agricultural aspects more in general, where we also try to bring in the science perspective and thoughts to be able to show what the science has found on a particular aspect. So this is again something that is an opportunity in which we can help the projects. But again, for this to happen, it's always good to keep us informed about the results that you are having and the opportunities and the findings, so that we can also help you disseminate those from our perspective. So I think I have more or less said what I wanted to say. I don't know, I hope it's clear. I don't know if there will be some questions maybe later on. And I'm looking forward to hear the other presentations, of course. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Susana. We have time for just a few brief clarifying questions. If anybody wants to just check on making sure they understood everything, you can ask that now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next speaker. So any quick clarifying questions? Don't see anything. All right, so next, then we will give the floor to Dr. Janka Kazakova and Viara Stefanova from the Society for Territorial and Environmental Prosperity. And they're going to talk about their experiences with promoting high nature value farming systems at the national level in Bulgaria. So welcome, Janka and Viara.
Thank you. I'll be having the pleasure of doing the presentation for our topic today. And Viara will be the one responding to queries if there are such. This is how we split the responsibilities for the presentation. So what we are going to present to you today is essentially a story of tango with policymakers in Bulgaria for the support of high nature value farming. And why I'm saying a story of tango, because we have some progress, some years, then we have some steps back, and then some progress, some years, and some steps back. And I think that this is, in essence, the story of policy advocacy in many aspects of environmental consideration. And I am not trying to be negative, but I am afraid that it will be also the story for agroecology mainstreaming in policies across Europe. So just a few short definitions to be clear what we understand by the advocacy, lobbying, and public policy terms that we are using. In our case, we understand or we join to the definition that public policies, whatever governments choose to do, and very important, choose not to do, because sometimes what governments choose not to do is equally important to what they do. And then the policy advocacy is what we do to support a cause or policy goal and transfer it to the policy documents and essentially have policy support when we speak for farmers. While lobbying is a more targeted activity to persuade someone in authority to give our organization or industry an advantage. That's why now we speak about policy advocacy initiatives that we had basically since 2006 for high nature value farming. The policy cycle, as we have it structured in the cycle of the programming periods of the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe, starts with the problem recognition. This is where we make demands for the government action or some problem to be recognized by policymakers and asking them to take action on this. Then we have agenda setting, where the issue, the topic, in this case, high nature value farming, is given serious consideration and is looking for solutions. Then we have the policy formulation, where we have specific proposals that can address the problem. Policy adoption, where our proposals become official policy. Then we have the implementation. And the last cycle is policy evaluation. So the first time when high nature value farming became a topic in Bulgaria was just before Bulgaria joined the European Union and started the implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy. It was also the first period in which the agri-environmental schemes were obligatory for member states, and support for high nature value farming was possible to be introduced in the rural development programs. So Bulgaria was a new member state. We didn't have much knowledge in developing this type of schemes measures, but there were several non-governmental organizations lobbying for the protection of the biodiversity on grasslands from birds populations perspective, but also from other species perspective. So there was quite quickly actually a decision taken that this is an issue, that this is a problem that should be addressed by the policy. And then the Ministry of Agriculture said, well, how we are going to implement support to high nature value farmlands if we don't know where they are. So let's do a map where these areas are, and let's see what we have in the country as an area that has to be supported. A team of scientists and NGOs and civil servants from both the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment was drawn together, and this map basically and the background database that led to its production was developed for something like 6 months, a very short period where everybody was very motivated to work together and to produce this map. So from the first moment where the measure could be implemented, it was implemented in these territories. So this is what the coverage of high nature value farmland in Bulgaria looked like, where the green is the grassland, the yellow is the arable land, and in the pink you have mixed land use. Let's see how the next stage, the policy implementation, actually was reflected in this from this support. So what's going on with these slides? So 2007 is the period when the map was produced. And in 2008 was the first year when farmers were able to apply. So the policy implementation started in 2008. And you see that they were, well, the territories that were covered were not very much, but then in the next year, they were even less. So rather than increasing the uptake, we had a decrease of the uptake. It turned out that the approach that was taken for the mapping oversaw the specificity of the grasslands in Bulgaria, that they had some scrub, that they had some trees, and these were actually excluded from the map, and so farmers were not able to apply for support for this area. This is the so-called problem with the land eligibility for CAP support, which is very well reflected in this change from one year to the other. And the way it was implemented in Bulgaria actually led to sanctioning for farmers in the country, and therefore this measure then was implemented quite weakly for a number of years before in 2012 it was taken up a bit more, but still not to the effect that we were hoping. Then in 2011, we had the Natura 2000 measure that was introduced again based on advocacy from non-governmental organizations, which also addressed high nature value grasslands, but only in Natura 2000 site. And as you can see in the years, this was quite successful because in the different periods, the uptake of this measure was quite significant. So what does it mean when we started making an assessment of the effect of this policy effort in Bulgaria? What did we learn from this implementation and from the figures that we see here? In fact, the overall coverage of the initial set of high nature value farmlands in Bulgaria has decreased significantly. As you can see, the areas that were still eligible for support from the original layer are a lot less in comparison to the first map that you have seen. But what is more important, when we in STEP started digging further and trying to discuss this with the Ministry of Agriculture of the effects of this support, is that besides the overall reduction in the high nature value farmland across the different categories, arable land, permanent pasture, mixed land use, the map that was still used to support high nature value farmlands actually disguised a significant change in the land use, because the majority of the farmland was already, as you can see, 65% was already arable land. So in fact, it means that the grasslands were no longer grasslands, they became arable land. And only 23% of the pastures remained pastures. For us, this was an indication for a significant problem in the way the policy support was continuing its implementation, because it was only based on the first map from 2007, and it did not take into account the changes that had occurred from 2007 to 2019. So we started asking the ministry, well, why is it? Do you have some analysis? What's going on? Well, the figures that were officially published is that from the agri-environmental measures, the support that was actually provided to real physical areas was less than half of the target support that was aimed at the beginning, while from the Natura 2000 measure, which we have here, in the second column, is doubled. But in the Natura 2000 measure, the majority of the land that was supported was arable land. So this is one of the hidden figures behind that was not, we were not able to get this information until we started digging into the implementation data. And then when the new programming period started, and we asked the Ministry of Agriculture, okay, are you going to make a new map for high nature value farmland so that you can target specifically the areas that are in need for this support? There was like, okay, let's see how the budget will be, whether we will implement the Natura 2000 measure, mostly because it's the only one that is really attractive for the farmers. And probably this is a better way to do that. So in the new programming period, we have no support planned for high nature value agri-environmental measure, but support planned for Natura 2000 measure. And in our assessment, we were asking the ministry, in the EU regulations, you have a requirement for no backsliding from the 2014-2020 period. So how do you justify this no backsliding if you're not supporting and if you're not making any efforts to make a real assessment of why there is this loss. And this is when we speak the tango between the our advocacy efforts and the ministry, but I think there is also a tango between the EU policy framework and the national level implementation, because one thing is written in the regulation, a different approach is taken at the national level. And then the minister said, well, we are certain now that we are going to proceed with Natura 2000 measure. It's the most successful and the most ambitious measure. So we are going to continue with it. But then when the targeted areas for support was published in the strategic plan for the new period, we see that the area for Natura 2000 support was also reduced. So again, the no backsliding principle was compromised. And a different problem occurred, that we say this is the most successful measure, but there is no monitoring of the biodiversity impacts of either the agri-environmental or Natura 2000 support measure. And then in the 2021 and 22, which was the period for significant lobbying support, we said for HNV, high nature value farming, the needs that needs to be addressed by the strategic plan are first related to farmland eligibility. So make more grasslands with trees and with shrubs eligible for CAP support. This make a different definition for grasslands in the lowlands and for grasslands in the mountains, because they have different characteristics. And this will improve the eligibility of their support. We also said that area-based support only, whether it's agri-environment or whether it's Natura 2000, is not sufficient, because we have farming business, they have other needs for investments in the farms, for innovations, for advisory support to farmers, how to take these innovations that are here and there and over there on their farms, how to adapt them to their farms. Administrative support is needed as well. So it's a whole package of support for this type of farming that is needed. Also, when you're setting the targets, be aware of the no backsliding principle. Support more rather than less, because what was supported in the previous period was not sufficient to stop the losing these areas that are important for biodiversity in this, so that the overall budgets that are allocated to these measures is relevant to the needs that they have, adapt them to the needs of farmers, and develop monitoring schemes to see what is actually the actual improvement on the farm resulting from the support. Where we are now is that we have the Natura 2000 measure, which is backslided in terms of ambitions. We have two eco schemes that were developed in the place of the agri-environmental scheme, but the budgets are not there. So this is the backstepping in our tango in the overall process of 20 years of advocacy activities for the high nature value farmlands. But what was more important is that in this process of working with the government, our analysis and our policy requests were taken up by livestock farming associations, and they made them their own. And the fact that they made them their own actually brought the eco schemes that are replacing the agri-environmental high nature value support. So for us, it was a very important lesson also that farming associations can be our allies in some cases where we have the right policy requests to the policymakers. Very important aspect is to have the analysis, as we had our analysis, in the right time for the policy cycle. Because in research, we are very often tempted to have a very detailed research and extract the maximum of the research. And then the policy process may be long gone before we have the results for this. So having the research results in the right time is very important to be able to influence policy making. If we have no direct access to decision makers, we were able to channel some of our messages through other environmental organizations or through the farmers associations when they joined our support. But the contacts that we have with both national and EU level authorities are very important, because we need to be recognized as trustworthy partner. And this is equally important as the quality of the results, to be recognized as a partner that can respond to needs for policy making at the right time. And I think I'm finishing here with my presentation. So thanks a lot for your attention. Yeah, and questions.
All right, thank you very much, Janke. We have, again, time for a couple clarifying questions. If you have something, write it in the chat, please. Otherwise, save it for the end for the discussion. So I don't see anybody typing or, oh, Chilag, did you have something? Oh, maybe a mistake there. All right, so yeah, then we'll move on to our final speaker. We'll invite Lynn Schan from the German Institute for Integrated Biodiversity Research. She is doctoral researcher there, specializing in ecosystem services, and she will talk about her experiences working with policymakers at the municipal level in Leipzig. So welcome, Lynn.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I should share my screen. A second. Oh. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm here also to represent my colleague Guy Pear, who's also in the Department of Biodiversity and People. He's leading the Agriculture and Ecosystem Service Group, and was also highly involved and get me engaged in the process of the consultancy of the city of Leipzig. So I'm sharing some insights of our scientific involvement of a very concrete process in the city of Leipzig, where they started to get a novel land procurement point system with their owned by the city agriculture area. We were able to consult and to discuss and give some further advice. Right, so I'm shortly going through the problem definition and the agenda setting where we haven't been involved, and then I will go into the policy drafting and the designing where we were involved and where we could also contribute. I also wanted to show the point system, because it's a broad overview of different agroecological practices, and I think it can be one example of how to define maybe agroecological principles at a municipal level. Also what Susana already said, it's kind of defined and structured at the EU level of with the Common Agricultural Policy, but what can we do at local municipal level? And this example, I think, reflects that a bit. So I shortly start with the background. So we face currently different polycrisis. We have different climate change issues, biodiversity loss, health crisis, and so on, increasing inequality. And this is trying to also, with respect to agriculture, we try to address different issues with policy tools at different levels to enhance sustainability and to enhance agroecology at all these different levels. And agriculture is mainly affected or is affected by the polycrisis and its overall effects harshly, and it's also increasing the effects of different aspects. And the CAB, as I already said, is trying to manage some of the effects, but is partially also failing in addressing it. And one of the main points here is that the land use and the land ownership is one of the barriers for farmers to react to those crises. And it's challenging also, for example, small scale farmers. And in addition, we have also, besides the Common Agricultural Policy, other policies like the Biodiversity Framework or the Nature Restoration Law, which is covered by the overall Green Deal that propose already new insights or new ambitious targets to support agroecology or a sustainable development within the agricultural sector. And right now, zooming into the municipal context of Leipzig, which is a city in Eastern Germany, around 150 kilometers southwest of Berlin, and 630,000 inhabitants, so quite big. And the city owns around 1,838 hectare agriculture area out of the 10,000 hectare agriculture area, which is located in that area. And especially politicians from out of the Greens, but also from the left and the Social Democrats Party had the ambition and the idea to fulfill, but also go beyond some of the EU and national targets. So they wanted to establish a sustainable food policy, which is not only focusing on the production side, but also on the consumption side. And they could also rely already on a well-established agricultural dialogue where they try to cover cross-thematic aspects of local stakeholders, which were farmers, but also retailers, and get them involved and see what their demands are for a sustainable food policy or what they're requesting from policymakers. So the city council already started the process in 2019-2020. And the agenda setting, as I already said, it was mainly driven by the coalition of the Greens and left and Social Democrats that also wanted to not only foster a sustainable food policy, but also focusing on an agroecological transition in the city area of Leipzig. And here, especially the political interest and the support from a well-known connected stakeholder group pushed the idea forward. So it was also already existing bilateral interaction between different stakeholders, like the local group of Friends of the Earth or the Food Policy Council in Leipzig, or other actors from community-based agricultures, that they have been in contact in formal but also in informal settings. And it seemed like starting with the production side and starting with a point system, they called it, for the land procurement was a good first start for their overall food policy transition. But they also had in mind to go, and they still have that in mind, to go beyond that and establish a new consumption oriented policy in the future. So there are second steps ahead, and this was already also criticized or mentioned by the other stakeholders, but they first wanted to focus on the land procurement. So they started the process in 2019, 2020, as I said, and also asked a consultancy, an agricultural consultancy, to do a first draft based on which they could involve other stakeholders that discuss the different criteria. But there hasn't been any progress between 2020 and 2023, which was mainly because the political interest wasn't there so much. And from the stakeholder group, there wasn't no hard pushing. But within that time, the farmers that were highly affected by only getting annual prolonging of their contracts, they were the actors which pushed on the policymakers, because they when they started that process, the city of Leipzig decided on only prolonging each contract to the farmers for 1 year, because they wanted to make sure that they managed to finish the point system. And since they weren't sure how long this will take, they could only prolong the contracts to the farmers for 1 year. But that, in fact, ultimately resulted in a no long-term planning perspective, which is highly needed when you plan on agricultural production. So that was actually one of the main issues that pushed it forward. And at that point, so that was around last year, where also the tensions got a bit higher, because the requirements for the requests from farmers that wanted to have the security of the long-term planning, also other community-based agricultural organizations wanted to know if they could maybe also lease one of the agricultural areas around them. So there was a need for clarity. So the city council, especially the Greens, but also in combination of the other involved parties, the lefts and the Social Democrats, they relied on their already existing stakeholder interaction and the agricultural dialogue, and called in a roundtable where I listed some of the stakeholders. So they invited farmers, organic farmers, and also conventional farmers, and farm cooperatives, then representatives from community-based agriculture and some environmental NGOs, the Food Policy Council of Leipzig, and Guy, Pierre, and me as the scientists. They originally didn't thought about inviting scientists to the roundtable, because they aren't naturally or considered as stakeholders. But there was a interesting point where the Greens visited, like some politicians visited our research institute, and Guy had a informal talk with some of the Greens that were really interested in our work of our working group, and there was also a formal meeting explaining what we were doing. So that was one aspect, and also in parallel, Guy got contacted by different environmental NGOs, especially Friends of the Earth, asked him to participate in a panel, and also some of the representatives from one community-based agriculture, they asked him on very specific scientific questions on, especially on organic farming and in comparison to conventional farming. So he was or is really well connected to the local actors, and also well recognized by his knowledge, and also overall our group established our knowledge and could support them with their questions. And to understand how the process worked is that it's also really relevant that our research institute is based in the city where they also wanted to establish it. So this is also, I think, a really relevant point to make. And right now a short focus into the actual point system, because I'm like very talking about like on a very meta level how this whole process established. But here you can shortly see the utilized agriculture area of the city of Leipzig, so it's more in the surroundings. And as I said, they had that annual prolonging, and the status of annual renewal were affecting 63 contracts. So there was that need to find a new, or to define those criteria they wanted to define. And the original draft I mentioned by the agricultural consultancy consisted of 2 different pillars, which were kind of in advance already defined, and that rely also on other documents that are already published by some farmers associations or church that are trying to define social, environmental, and some of them also economic aspects on criteria that can guide on land procurement or generally agricultural contracts or lease contracts. So one side is our mandatory requirements, and the other side are additional points you can get as a potential farmer, as a potential person who's leasing the area, and this can increase the possibility of getting this area, as the competition for agriculture area is really high. And in total, they came up with 17 different criteria. And here I try to highlight some of them in red and green. So this is the set of criteria that were obligatory to fulfill, or that are obligatory to fulfill. They will establish that point system in some modified manner this year. At least they try it. So it's extremely motivated to start with a point system. This is the first municipality that started with these criteria, and which wants to follow these criteria within agricultural land procurement. So they facing in the whole institutional and administrational process, they facing really concrete questions that haven't been addressed by other institutions. So it's a complete novel approach, and I highly appreciate that they started that process. And also within that roundtable discussion we had, all the stakeholders were really interested in the discussion and also in the suggested criteria. So I can shortly mention some of them which we found interesting and which we supported, like the implementation, the point 5 of the implementation or consolidation of ecological recommendations, where they have the idea of getting agricultural practitioners and environmental protection or conservationists together to identify area for landscape feature, or they asked them to do a soil test. And on this, we did further recommendations, like raising the question of where is the data, for example, for the soil test, where will this be stored, who will monitor this, is it also open for scientific evaluation, and is, for example, the implementation of landscape features only recommended or also mandatory, so that we could finally address some of the issues. And I think this aspect or this list of additional criteria is really interesting. So as I said, you can have this, they offered this point count where they sum up the points, and in the end, they could identify who is eligible for that area with the highest points. And here we had some interesting discussions on, especially on organic farming, which was highly supported by the Greens, and it was very controversially discussed in the round table, where also practitioners were there. And as I said, the community supportive agriculture was also there, but they aren't, for example, a organic managed farm. And this is also then added because we had that discussion of maybe supporting more or focusing more on the small scale farming rather than the organic agriculture, and including aspects like the reduction of pesticides or the reduction of fertilizers, rather than taking only the package of organic farming, but also considering and appreciate or taking into consideration that there are several aspects within the agricultural management that can be included without being without the overall organic farming label. But beyond that, okay, thank you. Beyond that, we also addressed several other aspects which we found have not been addressed, like socioeconomic criteria, the income of people that work there, also how many people are working there, the gender issues, gender equality, and also aspects of agroforestry, animal welfare. But I can also go into more details if you have questions on that issue. I wanted to highlight our, sorry, I realized that my presentation is a bit too long. I think it's probably, this one is the most interesting part, because I already addressed that issue of what we contributed. So on a reflection of the overall process, which will continue, is from our scientific or from the role as a scientist, we realized that the networking and the informal discussions were really crucial. Also being available for different stakeholders and actors, being also proactive and engaging at different events, engaging in the dialogue that is already established, but then also realizing that the science policy interaction has a high speed in with scientists are not always adjusted to or limited in taking other scientific consultancies from specialists. So we, in some cases, it was not always optimal in integrating other scientists in which we have in our institute, because the demand for consultancy or reflection on specific documents was within a day or within 2 days. But overall, the whole process of realizing how the policymakers were highly engaged and motivated, and also the stakeholders that have been involved were also willing to invest their time, willing to also adjust their opinions based on the scientific support we could give, and work as mediator. That was a really interesting task. And I'm happy to answer some of the other questions, but I realized it's already running out of time. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Lynn. So now we can open it to a general discussion. We have a nice contrast in cases, I think, there, hearing from Janke, where it was much more of a tango of this proactive advocacy, whereas in Leipzig, it was more of a process where they were invited as scientists to contribute. So that's a nice contrast there, and a nice set of experiences to contrast for the discussion. I don't see any questions coming up in the chat yet. Does anybody have any questions right away? I see Walter is jumping in right away, so maybe I'll just read Walter's question here, which is for Susana. So the other two presentations showed how important the local political context is for policymaking. What does this mean for the value of scientific information at the EU level?
Thank you for the question, Walter. No, this is really a key question, and very important, actually. I mean, in terms of the relevance of what comes out in terms of the local policymaking context for information at the EU level. Well, I think it's rather the way this should work. I think, in my opinion, is that especially when it comes to the common agricultural policy implementation, where we have again the authorities at the national level being responsible and really defining the policies and the actions at the national level. If future policies should really take this a lot into consideration when they are designed already at the European level. So, of course, for the next common agricultural policy, there will be again a proposal normally coming from the Commission, and then let's see what is going to happen in the future policy. Normally, the implementation model that we have now will continue to be seen, because, of course, you know that we have only 1 year of implementation of the new CAP. Nothing has been evaluated. I think, this is something that still has to be seen. But the way I would personally see it in terms of the policy process is that it is going to be very important to see how, in the implementation of the CAP plans, there has been also dialogue at the national level between the authorities in charge of the CAP implementation and the, hopefully, research happening also at the national level in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the findings, to then take those lessons at the EU level and propose the right set of and frame of overall CAP policy. This is the way I would see it. Again, I'm speaking here on my personal capacity. I'm not sharing any official Commission position in this. And I think in this regard, I think I didn't mention it in my presentation at the beginning, but in terms of how this has implications also in the way we do research and we fund research at the EU level. We have, of course, as you know, the classical research projects such as Agroecology-TRANSECT. So these are transnational research projects involving a number of partners from different member states, or also other third countries or associated countries when it's relevant, that lasts for a certain number of years. So there are, of course, very valuable results coming out of your projects, and these are it's very valuable information also for policy. But in terms of when it comes to agroecology, you're speaking also in the previous presentations about the monitoring, about the long-term perspective. Again, the links with the context and the territories. This also has lessons for the way we plan and we fund research. And in this regard, besides the transnational research projects, we are also tapping on the potential of other instruments that we have under the Horizon program, which are the partnerships. you may have heard that we have finally a partnership on agroecology being launched since the beginning of this year, actually. And there, one of the key pillars of the partnership is going to be also to strengthen this science policy dialogue with policymakers, but again, not only at the EU level, but specifically at the national level and the regional level as well. So this is something that we also wanted to achieve through this tool as a partnership in terms of feeding, creating stronger links between scientists and the activities and the findings at the local and regional level with the local policymakers and with the national policymakers, rather than having projects working on a transnational basis that are yielding interesting results, but maybe not extrapolable necessarily to all realities. So this is my contribution here. I'm not sure if I replied to the question, but thank you for that. Yeah.
That answers your question, Walter. Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much. I think this long-term perspective is what also makes researchers feel a little bit helpless. I mean, we're connected to the innovation hubs, as we call the actor networks, for only a short bit of time, but really, well, the Bulgarian experience shows how long you need to be engaged and how deep you need to be engaged. And well, let's hope that these networks provide a solution there.
And maybe just a follow-up, you maybe touched on it a little bit by talking about the importance of the context specificity. But a question would be to touch on something you mentioned a few times, which was the need for evidence for agroecology. And well, I guess some or many would say that there is plenty of evidence to inform action and policy. But in your opinion, what kinds of evidence, and maybe particularly what kinds of indicators, are important for researchers or scientists to focus on to better inform policy at the EU level, I should say?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the evidence, I think it's for policy making is key. We want to have always, I think, aspirational at all levels policies that are evidence-based. I think in the case of agroecology, it's of course, I said already at the beginning, there is of course evidence already out there, but in my opinion, more is missing. And well, it's not only my opinion. I think I've heard this many times in different contexts. In particular, I think what is needed is much more understanding of well, first of all, the concept of agroecology, even if a lot of improvement has been done there, and there are many countries that are already implementing agroecology, etc., and there is increasing understanding. But I know, and this links also actually to other research projects that have been working on specifically on this, on really mapping agroecology in Europe and getting a sense of how this is being implemented in different places, that there is still a lot of lack of understanding of the concept, what that actually mean. Is it organics? Is it regenerative farming? Is it, there is still a lot of work to do already in understanding the concept. Even though there, as I say, there has been already quite a lot of progress. And in case of research, I think, again, coming back to the partnership, the process towards preparing this European partnership has taken a few years. And there, one of the achievements, in my opinion, also has been the possibility and the coming together of a lot of countries. Well, right now there are 26 countries involved in this partnership coming together around a common understanding of the concept of agroecology. So that's something that I think was not there before this process started. So that's, to start with, I think this is one of the key missing points, really understanding the concept, also for the policy makers, for them to understand what do you mean? And then, of course, then the next level of complexity is that agroecology is not just implementing one farming practices, as you know very well, is implementing a set of practices that may work in one location, but maybe the same set of practices doesn't work in another context, even not so far away. So I think evidence in that regard is still needed, and that research has a key role to play there. Then involving, of course, more the end users in the finding of solutions, and that links again to what I said earlier about the living labs. Links again to the sustainability of these living labs and the future, how policies can also support there. So it's really a paradigm shift, if you like, in the way we do policies, not only agricultural policies, but also environmental, landscape planning policies, it's really social aspects, etc. And it's something that needs to be much more work needs to be done in that area. Definitely indicators and these things need to be there. Definitely in the case of biodiversity monitoring, I think it's key in particular, but not only. So that's a little bit my opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as Marta mentioned in the chat there, we actually have a work package in the Agroecology-TRANSECT project that's working on what does agroecology mean in Europe. So hopefully we can contribute to clarification on that as well. There was another question in the chat for Lynn. Looks like Lynn has answered that about what does she mean by farmer's origin and why is that important criteria for agroecology. Do you want to just touch
Yeah,
on
I
that?
can. I thought due to the time, I shortly try to answer it. But yeah, I think this is a crucial point, and we also weren't satisfied with that aspect. The original idea was to support local production. However, we think that not so, and this is very complicated within the EU context and competition of several different member states. So you can't exclude people from other European countries or other areas from wanting the agriculture area. But that was the idea, to regulate that a bit, and we also criticize that in our role because we think that especially innovative small farmers that haven't been so experienced but want to are excluded from the market to receive some agriculture area to maybe implement some of the agroecological practice which we have talking about. They are also excluded by this criterion, and that was in the original idea of the city council, and hasn't been really supported by us. And we don't think that this is an agroecological principle. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Maybe just one follow-up question for the point system, Lynn. How transferable is this system? Is it a generic system that could be used in other places? Or is it something that's quite specific to Leipzig? And has there been any other interest from researchers or other municipalities in Europe to implement something similar?
Yeah, I think there's a huge interest from different municipalities, and from political side, they try to push it into other municipalities. So they advertise it within different articles, newspapers, try to push it in informal meetings, also from the environmental NGOs and the farmers associations that have been involved in the stakeholder process. They are also in contact with other groups around Germany. It's a very, let's say, generic or generalizable point system that can be adjusted to different regions, but it's not specifically for the area of Leipzig. And I think there's a huge capacity to outsource it to different areas. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a great tool for people in the webinar here to use in their own context as well. Nice. Now we have a question for Janke, or I think it was Viara that was going to do the questions. So the question is from Walter. How do you decide on the topic on which to invest your time to do advocacy research? And a follow-up, how important is teaming up with other networks for your effectiveness in that advocacy work?
Yeah, I will take them, both questions. I think the fact that high nature value farmland represented about 1/3 of the land in Bulgaria It was managed in a way that maintained these extensive practices that preserved biodiversity and other environmental aspects, actually made us work towards making sure that they continue to be like that even after accession of the EU, where we expected intensification to take place. So the fact that we had these huge areas of well-managed territories from biodiversity perspective motivated us to start working on this, and then seeing how gradually this is being converted to intensive arable land actually motivated us even further to try to secure the remaining areas that are there. The networks that are important to work with actually are different, as we have said, both environmental NGOs, but also livestock farmers. And why are both important is because high nature value farming extends beyond protected areas and Natura 2000 sites. And from environmental NGOs perspectives at this point in time, early 2007 and onwards, the key focus was only on Natura 2000 areas because this is the hotspots of biodiversity where they're preserved. But the territories outside protected areas are equally important when we speak about extensive farming. So for us, it was important to work with environmental NGOs to recognize these territories as well and to support our lobbying and advocacy activities to make sure that in biodiversity values of farmland are not limited only to Natura 2000 sites. And the work with farmers is for them to livestock farmers to actually recognize that their practices that they traditionally do on the farms are in fact important for biodiversity, and their continuation is very, very important for that. So both types of networks were very important for us. And from this perspective, our role was quite unique, that we were able to talk to both the environmental and the farming organizations. And in this current period where we are focusing our efforts, where the tango is more on the back side, and we have, from policy perspective, the measures that are implemented are rather broad and shallow, so not very targeted towards biodiversity. In our innovation hub, we are testing the result-based agri-environmental scheme, which is very, very focused on improving the biodiversity value on farmland. So again, trying to bring new knowledge in view of the next programming cycle, that it can then be taken up and implemented at the national level. And let's hope it will be successful, but then it depends where in the tango will be. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. We had also a comment in the chat from Marta, I believe, regarding indicators, and well, that they tell us what we ask them, so they measure what we ask them to measure. I don't know, Marta, if you want to take the floor and raise that as a point of discussion, or make that a question addressed at one of the speakers in particular.
No, thank you. Really, it was just a clarification because we were mentioning before the issue of indicators, and it's very important when we talk about agroecology. But indicators are objective measures that measure what we ask them to measure, and this is subjective. So, and this is a typical example of productivity, that we have been measuring productivity in terms of kilograms per hectare of maize, wheat, or whatever, which is really much a focus of food as a commodity, basically. And if we want to move to another focus, which are more aligned with agroecology, then we need to move to another indicators, like the kilograms of biomass per hectare, or amount of people fed per hectare, which really are in the logic of agroecological agroecology. Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, super important point when it comes to evidence, I think, there. Thank you.
Can I add something? I couldn't raise my hand. I just wanted to add something on what Janka said and what are our lessons learned also regarding the evidence and why we are trying this result-based agri-environmental scheme. One of our lessons learned is actually that when we propose something to be taken up by the policymakers and when we wanted it to be included in the policy, we also have to propose the way it is going to be implemented. It is not just the idea, it is not just the objectives which we are we want to obtain or to achieve. We also have to propose, if we want really these things to be taken up, how this could be implemented, whether on a local level, whether on a regional level or at national level. But this is what we have also learned. This is how, when Janka was speaking, the high nature value map first was developed, and then how the Natura 2000 measure was developed and tested. It was developed and tested in different projects, and then it was taken up at national level when the solution for its implementation was there. So this is also a lesson learned which we are trying to follow up when we are speaking with our policymakers. Because if we go now and say, let's do result-based payment scheme nationally, they will ask her how it is going to work and how it is going to be implemented in terms of protocols, in terms of indicators, etc. And if we are not ready to give that evidence at that moment, then it will be more or less neglected, you know. So it's also a very important point which we have learned in our 14 years of trying to support the HNV farming. Thank you.
Thank you. I think really valuable insights as well, and also lending to the transdisciplinary perspective of not only working with other disciplines to understand how these practices can be implemented, but also with stakeholders and people that are actually working to do it and have been encountering the barriers and levers on the ground. But I think now we're kind of running out of time, or maybe even slightly over time. So I think, yeah, we can go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you, everybody, especially the speakers, for your time and your insights. And yeah, I think if there's no other pressing, very quick other questions, I think we can wrap it up.
Think we can. If anybody has any resources or any information that they'd like to share with anybody else, we will be sending a follow-up email with the recording. Janka, don't worry, clean slides, so they're going to look amazing in the recording as well. And also, if you want to share anything with this group or get in touch with anyone, you can always contact any of the people that you've seen today, and we'll make sure to contact you with the right people. But in the meantime, go and have a lovely, lovely weekend, because I think that everybody has earned that here, especially the speakers who were amazing. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.